agree with everyone, right? It's normal and natural in any workplace, in any group, and in any relationship. And it's not always a bad thing. So I will tell you that if you never experience conflict in your work relationships or your personal relationships or even in groups, then you're probably not being yourself or being authentic in that situation. So, for example, with a team situation, everybody has kind of a role that they may play in that team, but sometimes those roles may overlap. And therefore, there's a lot of pressure there, and people may end up butting heads or disagreeing. But conflict is not always a bad thing. It can actually lead to creative solutions and better understanding among individuals in that group. So let's focus on workplace for a minute here. What are some of the causes of conflict in the workplace? Well, people, right? People are in the workplace, and therefore we're going to have conflict, right? Where every person where there's a lot of people, there's always going to be disagreements. But the number one reason for workplace conflict would be communication. So maybe what I thought I said is not what you heard. Okay, so it's important that we pay attention to our communication and really clarify with another individual what they heard when we did say something. Most conflict actually comes around through misunderstanding of what people are saying to each other. Moving along, competition. All right. So a lot of times there one person wants to look better than the other person, or they want to look like they're the best employee, and that in itself can cause conflict, or one person wants to be the one that wins. Personal issues, I mean, we come into work, right, with a past. We come into work with our personal life. And sometimes those struggles that we have in our personal life can impact our level of stress and how we deal with the issues that we have in our workplace. For example, if someone's experiencing physical health challenges, or they're having marital problems, or maybe some challenges with their children, all of those things can create stress. And when we're stressed, we don't deal as well with difficult and adverse incidents and issues in our lives. Um, Also, values. When people have very dissimilar values, that in itself can create conflicts. For example, different cultural backgrounds or even generational differences. It's again how we approach work. Do we approach work as a job, or do we approach it as a career? And that in itself can impact whether we have conflict with people. Personality. Sometimes we just don't get along with certain personality types. Maybe somebody is an introvert and you're an extrovert, and that is difficult for you to handle. Or maybe there's some narcissistic personality in there that can impact whether we have conflict with someone or not. So when a conflict triggers strong feelings, and I want to stress this because oftentimes when conflict really triggers someone really having a strong reaction, there's often a deep personal need at the core of that problem. So we want to take a look, or at least try to explore, what is the need here? Can we figure out what this other person really needs from us? Because that can help us resolve that conflict. Now, I'm going to kind of compare some unhealthy responses to conflict versus some healthy responses. Let's start with the unhealthy. An unhealthy response is an inability to recognize or respond to what really matters to that other person. So, again, this can be, it can be coworkers, it can be friendships, it can be our romantic relationships, it can be clients or customers, right? An inability to recognize or respond what really matters to that other person can create significant conflict. And it's an unhealthy response. As I said earlier, there's a deep meaning to someone's reaction to something, and we want to try to help figure that out. It's not healthy to respond with anger or explosiveness or resentful reactions, or to withdraw love, or which can result in rejection or isolation or even fear of abandonment. Another unhealthy response is an inability to compromise or see the other person's side at all. So that's when a person has such a strong opinion of where they're coming from, that they're not even listening to the other side. They're not trying to put themselves in the other person's shoes and understand where they're coming from. Um, and feeling fearful or avoiding conflict. Okay. And because maybe there's an expectation of a bad outcome. Avoiding conflict can be just as harmful as someone being aggressive in dealing with conflict. So let's contrast that with some healthy responses to conflict. A healthy response is being able to have empathy. Where is that other person coming from? Can we put ourselves in their shoes? Responding to the conflict in a calm, non defensive, and respectful manner. So, not personalizing is how we respond calmly. When we personalize the way a person is responding or talking to us, then it's very hard for us to respond calmly because we've made it about us. A readiness to forgive and forget and to move past the conflict without holding resentments or anger. And this kind of reminds me of a recent conflict that I had with a new director that I was working with, and she came in as a new director, and I had my way of dealing with things with the director that was in her position prior, and an incident occurred, and I handled it the way I normally did, and she didn't like the way I handled it, and so and I very much like this person. I very much respect this person, but I didn't really appreciate the way she was coming at me in it. So ultimately, through a very calm discussion, we discovered that we just saw it very differently. So the compromise that we came up with was, okay, well, I see it different because this is the way I used to handle it in the past, but I understand that you're new. So in the future, I'm willing to do this. And we were able to resolve that conflict and move on and have a very great working relationship to this day. So it's in a readiness to kind of forgive, forget, and move forward. The ability to seek compromise, again, not punishing a person. And then this belief that facing conflict is the best thing for both sides. Again, when we avoid conflict, we create that elephant in the room, that constant feeling of distress that we may experience when we're with that person. So, self awareness and self regulation are really critical skills when we're trying to handle problematic or conflictual behavior. So, what is that? So, self awareness is the conscious knowledge of where you're coming from, of your own character, your own feelings, your own motives, and your own desires. So, it's really an understanding of how you're coming across to people and what's going on inside of you. So if you find yourself having, a fairly strong reaction to someone, but yet it almost seems out of character or maybe a little overreaction, then it's triggering something within you. And so knowing what that is very important when it comes to that communication, that ability to deal with that. And self regulation is that ability to control your behavior and manage your thoughts and emotions appropriately. So, in that same example of if you're having this strong reaction to something, it's the ability to regulate that reaction instead of coming across as if you're overreacting. Verbal de-escalation is a tool or that we use when a situation moves into maybe being very threatening or dangerous. And sometimes you may experience this with customers or clients, where you're not able to give them exactly what they need and want. And therefore, they start coming across very aggressively. And it could be somebody who's just having a really bad day, and you just triggered that with them. But the situation starts to feel dangerous. It starts to feel threatening. And that's when verbal de-escalation is important. It's that intervention that we use with people who we think could become aggressive with us. And in doing that, we use calm language and other communication techniques to diffuse that escalation, to redirect it, or even to de escalate the conflictual situation. So how do we maintain calm during this? Well, one of the most important things we can do is listen. Listen, listen, listen. It's the number one step in dealing with a situation, whether it's unreasonable or not. So everyone wants to feel heard. So we want to really focus on what that person is saying, not on what we want to say next. So I always tell people we always have this constant chatter in our heads, constant chatter, chatter, chatter. And when we're having a conversation with someone, we're often thinking about what we want to say next, as opposed to what that person is really saying to them. And I always challenge people to try to shut off that chatter and really, really focus on what that person is saying. And sometimes that means that we need to allow them to vent. And sometimes that's all they need. And again, what our struggle with that is not to personalize it, because it's hard not to personalize it when someone's coming at us with that anger. And then another really helpful thing is to summarize or reflect back to them what you just heard them say. And this helps them to feel that you're really listening to them. So, for example, if someone is saying something to you or venting to you, then you can say, okay, so what I hear you saying is that correct? And then you can kind of move forward. And that person is feeling at that point as if you are really listening to them. Staying calm is really key here, because if that person is escalating and you escalate with them, then that situation can get really out of hand. It becomes very emotionally charged, and it's easy to get caught up in that, and we don't want to do that. So how do we stay calm? We pay attention to our breathing. We may have to have some calming self-talk in our head. We want to take slow deep breaths, and when someone is yelling at you, there's really nothing to be gained in yelling back, right? It just will escalate the situation even more. So we want to remain calm. We want to keep our voice low and clearly state what we're thinking and feeling and what we're hearing. So no matter how that person is treating you, we want to be respectful of them, and not show them negative emotions, because again, that's not going to be very productive for anyone involved. So what is the person really trying to gain or avoid is the question that I tell you to think about. Like, when a person is escalating on something, what is it that they really want? What are they trying to gain? What do they want to avoid? And always reminding yourself that that behavior is not about you, but rather about that situation. We want to, again, just, I can't stress enough, avoiding personalizing it. And we want to show empathy and compassion. We want to be able to say, I understand how you must feel in that situation. We don't have to have been in that situation, but we can put ourselves in that other person's shoes and really understand how they may be feeling. And and then, it's not just how they're feeling, but then having a genuine desire or compassion to what they're feeling, and then trying to help them move forward, or gain some kind of solution. And sometimes that means apologizing. It doesn't mean apologizing because we did something wrong, but apologizing because they're not happy and they're not getting what they think they need and want. And even just saying, let's see if we can make this better for you. Offering solutions, trying not to be defensive, asking the individual what he or she feels should be done, and then discuss what part of that or piece of that is possible. And then finally, we want to be able to still set limits and boundaries, because it's not helpful if we allow people to disrespect us in an abusive way. So that means we have the right to be assertive as long as we're respectful in it, and ask for the respect from that other person. Because when we allow them to cross our boundaries, then we stop respecting ourselves. And that may mean saying to someone, I see that you're becoming very angry, and I want to give you a chance to take a nice deep breath and relax. So how about if we take a break and start over again? Or how about if we take a 5-minute break and then try again? Recognize also your own triggers. If there are certain behaviors that trigger you, that goes back to that self-awareness we talked about earlier. If there are certain behaviors that trigger you, really paying attention to whether you're being triggered, and always be clear in your communication, because miscommunication often is the trigger for conflict. So I'm going to briefly just go over some communication styles. People can communicate passively, passive aggressively, aggressively, or assertively. Our goal is to be in the assertive side, which is where we are being honest and direct, and we're confident, but we're also being empathic to that other person. And this is when we believe that we both have rights and needs. When we move into that aggressive realm, that is where somebody is inappropriately honest, where their directness is hurtful because it feels like it's attacking and blaming, and it can become very controlling and self-enhancing. And this is where the belief is that my rights and needs prevail over yours. A passive aggressive can be very hard to deal with, and it's not always easy to pick out. But both passive and passive aggressive individuals are not being honest about their emotions. They're being very indirect. But with passive aggression, the person will be self denying at first as if they're being passive, but then later on, they're going to be self enhancing and not really be concerned about how that impacts others. For example, you have a conversation with a coworker about a behavior that is negatively impacting the team, and that person says, okay, I understand that, and then later on that person stops talking to everybody in the group and they isolate and withdraw. That behavior becomes passive aggressive. And finally, passive is when a person doesn't feel like their rights or needs are important, and they're very indirect and emotionally dishonest and can also be blaming and constantly apologetic. I want to point out that there was a study conducted in 1967. Most people know about this, that does indicate that only 7% of communication is based on what you actually say. And 38% is on voice and tone, and 55% on body language. I can't stress that enough, because if you're standing in front of a person and you have your arms crossed, you are basically telling them that you're unapproachable. Or if you are backing away from them or leaning heavily into them where you might appear aggressive, it's important to really pay attention to what is your body language and what is the body language that you're seeing from that other person that might be giving you some kind of indication as to what is really going on or bothering them. So some strategies, again, addressing the conflict. When we don't address conflict, it actually makes that situation worse, and the conflict can escalate. When we clarify the issue and the misunderstanding. Okay, so let me see if I understand what you're saying here. And this is what I think you are asking for. Like, just being able to clarify, bringing people together. If the conflict involves multiple people, let's all come together and talk this out in a calm manner. And let's find a common ground. And then what are the possible solutions? Okay, so what I hear you saying is this, and is that correct? And if they say yes, then say, okay, so here are some possibilities for how we might resolve this. And then coming up with some choices and some options, and then working together to figure out which one of those options might be the best. And then finally following up later to see how that person is feeling, how things are moving forward, and how you can help and assist. Always make a genuine effort on the person's behalf, because if they know that you care, even if you can't give them what they want, they tend to be a lot easier to deal with and talk through situations with. Providing choices, as we just discussed, helps people feel like they're more in control. Acknowledging and validating a person's feelings. And we're going to talk about validation in a minute. And then, as I said a minute ago, watching that body language and tone of voice. So validation is a form of empathic response that communicates that what that person experiencing is true. So in other words, I understand how you're feeling. I validate that feeling, but let's move forward and see if we can find a way to help you feel better. It's reflecting back to somebody without judging. It shows understanding. It shows empathy, and it's actually validation is associated with a higher level of satisfaction and understanding, lower negative affect, and a building of trust, which also promotes engagement within a group. So again, validation is just saying your feelings and your thoughts are valid and true. Because remember, there's no wrong feelings. Everybody's feelings, your own feelings are correct. There's no wrong feeling. There's no right or wrong. So what is empathy? As we talked earlier, it's that ability to put yourself in someone else's shoes, to understand where they're coming from, even if you've never been in that place yourself. It is the most human form of consoling someone. So when you show empathy towards somebody, you really put them in a place where they feel connected to you. Always pay attention to the environment that you're having that discussion with in, and show that you care, be able to set those boundaries, and again, pay attention to the body language. And we're going to finish up here with this little thing, this little picture of ignoring the terrible delivery and focusing on the content. So sometimes people deliver things in an aggressive manner, in an angry manner. But what we really want to focus on is, what are they really asking for? What is it that they really want? And how do we resolve this conflict in a way that feels like a win-win to everyone? Okay, so that being said, I know that's a lot of information in a short amount of time. Does anybody have any questions?